am proud of my Iranian heritage, as I'm sure a lot of you are proud of your own backgrounds and your heritage. But I will tell you what else I'm proud of, and I'm sure you are as well. I'm proud to be American.
And things will be going great. I'd be at the playground playing with my friends, Sam, Brett, Jesse. Life is good. Sure, my name is Maz, but they don't know where that's from. They don't know, right? Everything's cool. Until my dad would come by to pick me up. And he would show up in his Mercedes-Benz, which is a standard Persian issue car. And he would have the car filled with the entire family.
Hello, and welcome to Washington Post Live. I'm Elahe Izadi, a staff writer covering media for the Washington Post. And my guest today is the comedian, actor, and podcaster, Maz Jobrani. Maz, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. That was a cool introduction. I was tearing up going down memory lane.
Well, that's what we're aiming for, tears here. Let's just jump right in with your personal story. The introduction video that we just saw, the story that you told about growing up, what does that tell us about your upbringing and what it was like being an Iranian American kid growing up in the US?
You know, I've always said I never felt American enough and I never felt Iranian enough. And I think a lot of people who come to America at a young age from other countries probably have that feeling because you are exposed to American culture. You're exposed to, I used to play baseball. I was a big fan of Eddie Murphy's. There was all my friends, like I say in that bit, or a lot of my friends were just American friends. And then I would come home and my parents were these immigrants to me who sounded different and the food smelled different. Don't get me wrong, I love the food. But it was always this thing of a little bit of a struggle and a little bit of being embarrassed about your background. And it takes a while till you're a little older and you start embracing. You go, oh, wow, there's actually a great culture that I've kind of tried to ignore and shun it a little bit.
Yeah, and I think in the past you've written or you've talked about how coming to embrace the beauty and traditions of Persian New Year's, Nowruz, allowed you to sort of have this awakening that a lot of other immigrant kids have. What came out of that awakening for you? And is that one that you see other first and second generation Americans experiencing?
I think the more important thing for me was when I went to college, I met other Iranian Americans who had grown up in a similar environment as I had. So all of a sudden I saw people that were close like me, and then we could speak English and Persian together, but still we were American, and we still, would make fun of our parents' accents or whatever it might be. But all of a sudden I realized, oh, there's more of us. And I think that and then I actually gravitate also towards other kids from other backgrounds that might be, East Indian American or Mexican American. I have an affinity with them because I think that, again, we are these in-betweeners almost. And then you learn, like you were saying, you learn to then embrace the stuff from your country of birth. So, for example, to this day, when the World Cup happens, if the Iranian soccer team is playing, even though I haven't been to Iran for over 20 years and I've grown up my whole life in America, I still root for the Iranian national team. And so it's you find ways to come together culturally. There's, as you said, Persian Nowruz sometimes brings us together. But in my day-to-day, I would say I'm still very much more involved in the American culture and in the world of American activities and politics and all that.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the in-betweeners, and that's kind of how I thought about it too, like existing in this in-between space. Do you feel like performing around the country and meeting people from all different backgrounds that there are actually a lot of people in that in-between space, and what does that space look like for everybody in that?
Absolutely. I actually, my wife is from India, and so our kids are mixed. So I love when I meet other couples that are mixed because I took my in-betweenness and I made it even more in-betweeny by finding a wife from another background. So we have a lot of cultures going on, and I like it. My personal favorite when I perform is when I have a mixed audience. I hate having a homogenous audience of any kind, whether it's all white Americans or all black Americans or Asian Americans or all Persians or all Indians. I love it when we're all together in a room. And what's interesting is when you talk about your experiences, you realize how much we have in common. That's the other thing that really opened my eyes, because I used to always say my Persian parents were like this, my Persian parents were like that. And then I remember one time I used to do this joke about my grandmother, and the joke was that she used to keep her cash in her bra. And the joke goes, I said we always thought she was size D cup until one day we went to buy a house and she pulled the cash out from her bra and we realized she was a size A cup. And then we looked closer and we realized it was grandpa. So the joke is silly, and it's about, your grandmother putting her money in her bra. Well, I did that joke at the Laugh Factory in Los Angeles, and there was these two Latina, like I think they were Mexican American girls. They were falling out of their chairs laughing, and I go, "Oh my God, Mexican grandmothers put their cash in their bra." And then I was talking to somebody else who was like, "My Italian grandmother used to put her cash in," and then someone else, "My Jewish grandmother," and I go, "Oh my God, all grandmothers put their money in their bra." Not all, but a lot.
It's a worldwide banking system, apparently.
Yeah.
Something else that you wrote previously, and I think it was in your book, that comedy comes from tragedy, and being Iranian in America from 1979 on had been quite tragic. Can you talk a little bit more for those tuning in? Like, what is it about that tragedy and within that experience that drew you to it to talk about it in your comedy?
Well, I am such an advocate for immigrants in terms of I feel that we should be very much accepting of immigrants. That's why, for example, the travel ban upset me, or whenever we have these issues at the border, it upsets me. I'm not saying that our immigration system doesn't need some fixing, but my heart goes out to immigrants because I am an immigrant. I came to America in the late 70s when the revolution was happening in Iran. And I thought to myself, when that travel ban happened, I thought, what would have happened if, when we landed from Iran, fleeing the revolution, if we had been turned back because this travel ban had just been imposed? Well, that could have been dangerous to us. And similarly to those that came from Syria, or more recently from Afghanistan, or they're coming from Central America, I feel that we need to be sympathetic to immigrants. And I know that as an Iranian immigrant, when I first came, we're one of the first groups who came to America fleeing the government that had taken over, which was the Islamic Republic of Iran. So we were the ones that were leaving Iran at the time were against that government. And we land here. And then when they take Americans hostage, suddenly we start getting the brunt of it because a lot of Americans didn't have anyone else to beat up or bully. So in America, they started calling you effing Iranian. They would beat you up. I was in the fourth grade back then, and kids were, getting, like I said, they'd be getting beaten up or bullied, or I've heard of other incidents of adults being threatened, to get killed. I mean, it was a real heightened time, and no one, again, this goes back to the American blind patriotism that takes over. For example, we're seeing it now sometimes when you hear about Asian hate. There's hate crimes against Asian Americans because of the coronavirus, which had nothing to do with these Asian Americans. So similarly for us, we had nothing to do with taking the hostages, but we were the ones getting the hate. And so it feels like we go in cycles and we don't learn, but I try as much as I can to remind people to embrace immigrants and not blame them for the actions of some other government that has nothing to do with them. So that we were one of the first groups that happened to. I mean, obviously there was the Japanese as well during the World War II, in the Japanese internment camps, where Americans were being put in internment camps. So it's an ugly thing to see. And I think as a kid, I was pretty resilient. I was good at sports, so that helped me get through it. I also I think I might have turned to comedy a little bit to try and deflect and not get bullied as much. And the third thing I realized later in life, I used to take a lot of candy to school, and I used to give it out to all the other, kids. And I realized I learned to bribe my way to friendship at a young age and not get bullied.
It's a very useful tactic.
Yes.
Um, yeah, and you've talked before about how your approach to comedy isn't just simply to make people laugh, but also to challenge their perceptions of Middle Easterners. I'm so curious, how do you thread that needle as an artist, and does it feel like a lot of pressure?
Listen, I always say my number one goal as a comedian is to be funny. So, I have silly jokes and I have political jokes, but ultimately I'm trying to be funny. So that's my first thing. I never set out and go, oh my God, how do I educate people on Middle Eastern people in this joke? I don't set out like that. But I do know that being one of the first comedians of Middle Eastern descent to perform in America, I remember early on when I first started, I took a stand-up comedy class and they said, write about what you know. And what I knew was the experience of an Iranian growing up in America. So I started writing about that. And then come to find out that there's just a lot of Americans don't know about that experience. A lot of Americans, all they know about Iranians or Syrians or Afghans or whatever, Egyptians, et cetera, is what they hear in the latest news, and that's it. And usually they hear negative things, or they see us in a movie trying to blow something up, or they don't have the experiences I had. I grew up with loving parents. I grew up with a lot of traditions going on in our house. My grandparents were always living with us. I grew up with siblings that I loved. I grew up with a lot of love and support, and the same things that an American kid might have been growing up. I went and saw Star Wars. I went and saw all the Rockies. So all of that to say, when I go on stage and I do my stand-up, I don't necessarily have to be talking about a Middle Eastern experience. I can just be talking about my own experience. And then if I just sprinkle in the fact that I'm Iranian American, I think the audience watches and goes, oh, wow, you're Iranian American and you did go to the movies? Oh, I didn't know you guys went to the movies. So similarly, I'm telling you, when we did the Axis of Evil comedy tour that came out in 2007, and we would go and read people in chat rooms and what they were saying, and it was four of us. We were four Middle Eastern American comedians on American television. I saw somebody write somebody else, and they said, I never knew these people laughed. And what's happening is in the show, we're telling jokes, but the camera cuts to the audience, and you've got audience members that are of Middle Eastern descent laughing. And you go, oh my God, we've never on American television shown Middle Eastern people just having a good time and laughing. And so it kind of blew my mind, but that's part of it.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you actually about the tour and the things that you learned from the Axis of Evil tour. Traveling around performing that in a post 9/11 world, the experience of being Middle Eastern in America during that time, but also what did you learn about what it was like to showcase the diversity of that experience? You mentioned there were four comics. You all didn't have the same background nor the same experiences per se.
Right. So there was Ahmed, he's Egyptian American, Dino Bidala and Aaron Cater are both Palestinian Americans. And we had some similar things going on with just, again, at the time, Axis of Evil was post 9/11. The way it was put together was in the year 2000, Mitzi Shore, who was the owner of the Comedy Store and known as a guru in comedy, in the year 2000, she was watching the news, and there was the latest uprising or intifada with the Palestinians and the Israelis. And so she being Jewish, said, I feel like there's going to be a need for a positive voice for Muslims and Middle Easterners in the near future. And this is before September 11th. And so she put together a show, and she called it the Arabian Nights, where it was me and Ahmed and Aaron Cater and whoever else was, close to being Middle Eastern. So we had an Indian American. We had a white girl who belly danced. It was a mishmash of stuff. But eventually we took that show and we changed the name to Axis of Evil Comedy Tour to lampoon the title that President Bush had given to Iran, Iraq, and North Korea, and started touring with it. And what was interesting was, first of all, people that came to our show kind of knew what to expect. So I don't think we had anybody coming to us to watch our show in a they would come and be surprised that, oh my God, who are these guys? Like, they came trying to see probably a left-leaning point of view, a point of view that came from people who have struggled with identity or have had their people be, I will say, blamed for a lot of stuff. So obviously September 11th was 19 hijackers, but all of a sudden we're all thrown into this category. And so it was, I think people knew what to expect. What was actually interesting was after September 11th itself, because we were at that point still called the Arabian Nights, Mitzi had sent us to go to the La Jolla Comedy Store to do a show. And this was maybe like 6 months, 8 months after September 11th, because originally when September 11th first happened, Mitzi said, let's not do the Arabian Nights show for a while, because obviously people were on edge and it was a tragic time in our country. And so she didn't want to be insensitive, and she also didn't want to put us in danger by putting up Arabian Nights. But again, 8 months later, when she goes, okay, now it's time for you guys to get back on stage. And by the way, we were starting to see some of the hypocrisy that was happening, where the Bush administration was using September 11th to go into Iraq, and there was the Patriot Act and all this stuff. So it was our job to talk about these things. She put us on a show in La Jolla at the La Jolla Comedy Store, and the name Arabian Nights was up. And the manager called us and said, hey guys, I just got someone calling in saying that they're threatening you. Like, the fact that there's Arabian Nights performing here, they threatened to kill you guys. And me and the guys, we kind of had to talk about it. And I remember talking to Ahmed, and we said, should we do the show? Should we not? And I said, I think it's an empty threat. And jokingly, I said, even if it's a real threat, what a better way to go than on stage? We'll be telling jokes and then we go. So that was interesting to encounter a little bit. And that night went off without a hitch. And as a matter of fact, that club, which is near Camp Pendleton, which, big Marine base down there in Southern California, we had a lot of military coming to our shows when we would perform in La Jolla. And a lot of them actually embraced us, because they would say, I just came back from Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever they were. And they would say, I never thought I would be able to laugh about these types of issues, but thank you guys for talking about them. So it was interesting to get it from their point of view.
Yeah, and the immediate aftermath of 9/11 was especially a fraught time for comedians and all comedy in general. Getting back on stage for any comic would have been challenging at that time. Were you scared, or how did you? I mean, did you just approach it with this sort of lighthearted take, or did you feel like this was, I'm called to do this. This is my mission to not let the terrorists win, I guess.
No, this whole thing, it's so funny because, again, Americans, we really try to simplify things, right? They did it because they hate our freedoms. I mean, really, is that what it is? Or is there political stuff going on here? When it happened, when September 11th happened, I honestly felt that was the day that comedy died, kind of like the day the music died. I thought, how could you ever be funny again? It was so tragic. New York held a dear place in my heart simply because that's where we first landed when we first came from Iran to America. So I remember New York of the late 70s, and I've always just loved New York. And then obviously Washington, and it was such a crazy time. With the 20th anniversary recently passing, I watched a lot of documentaries and was just reminded of how hectic and crazy and sad it all was. And so I thought I could never be funny again. And so that was that Tuesday. And the comedy clubs always stay open. The Comedy Store, Laugh Factory, they're always open, even on Christmas. I've performed at the Comedy Store on a Christmas Eve or Christmas Day night, 25th, and there's been moments where there's like 3 people in the audience because everyone's home with their families. But obviously when September 11th happened, the clubs all closed, and that was the first time I'd ever seen them closed. And the club remained closed until I think Friday, when they decided to open up, because, as you said, there was a push to try to get back to normalcy, to not let the terrorists win. But also, I think people needed laughter to release some of that stress. And so I know that Friday night, the clubs were full and people were laughing loudly. But the truth is, I didn't get a chance to go back to the clubs that weekend because, again, Mitzi, I think, was protective a little bit and didn't want to put us up on stage because of our backgrounds. And so the first time I performed, I think after September 11th, was at a private event that I'd been booked to perform at. And I tried to back out of it because I called them. I said, I don't know if I can be funny. And they said, no, please come. I said, well, I'm Middle Eastern American, and there's this anti-Middle Eastern sentiment right now. And they said, no, come. The host's wife is Turkish. They'll embrace you. You'll be fine. So I said, all right. So I went, and I'll be honest with you, I just remember, whereas maybe before September 11th, I would start my act by saying, hi, my name is Maz Jobrani. What kind of name is Maz Jobrani? It's an Iranian name or whatever. And then, so right out the gate, I would indicate I'm Iranian and then get into it. This show, that was the first show after September 11th, I recall slowly dipping my toe into my Iranianness. So I think I had like 3 or 4 minutes at the top that didn't mention anything about my ethnicity. And then I think at some point I basically was like, anyway, in case you're wondering, I was born in Iran. And then I'm like, yeah, I know. I'm not too happy about that either right now, and then just try to really let them know whose side I was on. I mean, I went out and bought an American flag back then. I mean, that's how crazy, partially because I didn't want people attacking me. So I had an American flag in the back of my car. I remember pulling up at the Comedy Store, and some of the comics were making fun of me. They're like, Maz Jobrani's got a flag so they don't attack him. I was like, you better believe I do.
It's a nice insurance policy.
Yeah.
You mentioned this depiction of Middle Easterners on television, and just even seeing people in the audiences laugh in the special that you all recorded. You also wrote a book some years ago, I'm Not a Terrorist, but I've played one on TV. How do you assess the current state of representation of Middle Easterners in pop culture when you look at your success and that of others?
I think we've come a long way. So I first got inspired to be an actor and be a comedian because of Eddie Murphy. Then as a kid, when I was in 7th grade and 8th grade, I was in plays. I played Little Abner, who is this country kid. I later on in high school, we did a rendition of Batman where I was Batman. So in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, I'll go to Hollywood. I get to play all these parts. Well, you get here, and once they find out you're Middle Eastern, they go, oh, can you say, I will kill you in the name of Allah? And you're like, can I play the doctor? They go, sure. And then you can hijack the hospital. You're like, no, you're not getting the point. So those were the roles starting out, and I took a few, and I didn't feel good doing them, so I stopped. But more recently, I would say you have shows like Rami, which is a great example of a guy who's Muslim American, but it's a great show. It's about him trying to live his life as a single guy in New York City, basically. You've got shows like, I will say, I mean, Mindy Kaling isn't Iranian or Middle Eastern, but still, it's like of that world. Aziz Ansari, Hassan Minhaj, Mo Amer, more and more we're starting to see this start to, get projects from these points of views that, in my opinion, are bringing us a little bit more into mainstream. I would ultimately love to have a Blackish with a Middle Eastern family or something where more people are seeing it, because ultimately I think when we see it, when Americans who don't know Middle Easterners because they don't live around them, when they see that depicted in a film or television program and it's entertaining and it's fun and they're lovable and likable, I really do think it makes a difference and makes them want to embrace these people or accept these people more than if they don't see representation on film and television.
Yeah, and in a recent special of yours, you tell a joke about having to perform. You've traveled all around the world, you perform all around the world, and you tell a joke about having to perform for a government censor who has to approve your act because of the country that you're in. And I just thought that was it was very funny, but also given that experience, I'm assuming it happened to you. I'm just interested to hear your perspective on the concept of cancel culture within comedy, which is, the idea that there's a pushback to certain kinds of materials or jokes, and this is akin to censorship, as someone who has dealt with like government censors.
Yeah, that was in Kuwait. It was very interesting, and it was kind of silly because I go, what? He wanted me to perform it for him, but he didn't speak English, and I'm going, what? And so it was very silly, and he was just sitting there, and I was just walking around the stage doing my act, which, by the way, I think was a different act than the act I was going to do the next night. It was very kind of loosely done. But I always say in America we have our own. When I first started touring in the Middle East, we did with Axis of Evil, we went to the Middle East. We did 5 countries. It was sold out. It was kind of like rock and roll. I always say, like, we flew in 2007 or 2008, we flew from the States to the Middle East. And I feel like over the Atlantic, we turned into the Beatles, because once we landed in Dubai at the time, they said, oh, there's a press conference. And I go, press conference? Who's coming to our press conference? Well, lo and behold, there's like 30 news outlets. They're asking questions. What's it like doing comedy in the US? What's it like living under Bush? What's it like? Oh my God. And then we did 27 sold out shows in 30 days in Lebanon and Jordan, just all over the place. And, but wherever we went, for the most part, they would say, you can talk about whatever you want, just no sex, no religion, no politics. Those were the things in the Middle East. And the joke was, well, then hello and good night, or salam alaikum and alaikum salam, But I always said that in America, we also had our limitations, because I did a show on Comedy Central back then called Premium Blend, where comedians do about 5 or 6 minutes each. And in order to do the show, you have to submit your set to the, standards and practice people. And they came back to me, and in my act, I mentioned some products. I didn't talk badly about them. I just mentioned them, like 7-Eleven and Mercedes and a few others.
Right.
They came back, they go, you can't mention 7-Eleven, Mercedes, or these because they might be sponsors. Can you change the car and the store? And so all that to say, we also have, like, for the longest time, I would say, in the Middle East, God is God. In America, tide is God. And so we do have our limitations. I mean, I've been lost a job because I had a tweet that was a retweet about Chase Bank, and they were like, oh, we don't want you because you retweeted it. And I go, that's it. So we have that happening in our country as well. But when you go to cancel culture and this whole thing of one group being upset about a joke, I think there's a couple of things. One is, and I'll make this quick, one is that if it really is a learning moment, we can really try to learn from it. So I have kids, and if my kids say, Dad, people don't use that word anymore, I have a choice. I could either say, well, you guys are just, you guys are woke, too woke, and I'm not going to listen to you. Or I could choose to change with the times and say, I'm going to stop using those words. Ultimately, you laugh and die. You live and die with the laughs. So if the audience is laughing and people are coming to see you, then I feel like, okay, I'm doing something right here, at least for my audience. But if I start getting people groaning or looking at me, or somebody comes up to me after a show and says, hey, that joke you did about X, Y, and Z, I'm from that community and it really bothers me. Well, then I have some thinking to do, and maybe I try to sympathize a little bit. So it's a fine line. But I would say that we've been, cancel culture, I don't think is necessarily new. I mean, again, under the Trump administration, when I would do Trump jokes, even to this day, if I mention the name Trump on stage, quite often there's a Trump supporter in the back going, you can't make fun of him, man. What are you doing? And I'm like, he's the president. He was the president. We're supposed to make fun of him, but they want to cancel you.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you, Maz, so much for speaking with me.
Thank you for having me on. It was fun to talk to you. Thanks, Elahe.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to all of you for joining us. today. To see what other interviews we have coming up, head to WashingtonPostLive.com and register for our programs. I'm Elahe Izadi, and thanks for watching.